So small edit. I'm from the UK originally, but I spent a couple of years living in Sydney. And yeah, I'm UX designer at MSc. Today I'll be talking about decision making. So I'll start off with looking at some theories and concepts around how we make decisions. And then in the second half we'll look at some more practical examples about how we can use that to design for better decisions. So the first concept I'll look at is this idea that often when we're making decisions, we're just looking for the first best option, which is summarized in this quote from a clever guy, Theodore Roosevelt, that in any moment of decision, the best thing you can do is the right thing, obviously. The next best thing you can do is the wrong thing, and the worst thing you can do is nothing. And this reminded me of a conversation I had with my brother, who is a junior doctor, and he was doing a rotation in emergency and learning about critical situations. So when it's really, someone's life's on the line and they've got to make a decision about the best plan to save that person's life. And I said, did you get any training around decision making in those pressured situations? And he said, the one thing they're told is the most important thing is that you must make a decision. The worst thing you can do is not make any decision at all. So they have to make a plan with the information available to them and just go with that first best plan that presents itself to them and then adapt as they're kind of carrying that out. And slightly tangentially, that reminded me of something I experienced when I was signing up for a subscription. So this is a prototyping software in Vision. I was doing a 1-month freelance project, wanted just a monthly plan to keep things cheap, but accidentally signed up for a year, which kind of illustrates that often we're muddling through. We're looking for the first best option to get something off our to-do list, looking for the big green button, and we might miss the small things. So it's easy to get things wrong if you don't have your wits about you. And this idea of picking the first best option is, it comes from this concept called satisficing, a combination of satisfy and suffice from a behavioral economist called Herbert Simon in the 1950s. And it's this idea that in optimal conditions, we have the capacity to make perfect decisions, but often we don't have that optimal environment around us. There might be background noise, kids screaming at you, something going on, or there might be emotions involved. You might be feeling anxious or in a hurry. So we're often looking for that first best option, good enough. And this compares to a different strategy, maximizing, where certain people or in certain situations we might exhaustively consider all the options available to us, compare this with other people, invest lots of time and energy, but actually after that you might make a better decision at the end of it, but you're more likely to question it and you're more likely to experience regret. And we see this at MSc with our persona groups. We see that most people generally, when they're managing their money, they're satisficing. They're just getting the first best option. They know that they could be spending more time saving money. There could be a better deal out there for them, but actually they just want to get that done and do something that's a bit more attractive, a bit more kind of enjoyable for them. But maximizers, we also have that group where this is almost a hobby. They will exhaustively consider all the options out of them available to them. They'll try and game the system, immerse themselves in all of this, but then they're actually more likely to question the deal that they lined up with. So if we've seen that we're often picking the first best option, there's something else at play, which is this kind of trade-off between effort and reward. So in this equation, you can see we're often balancing the amount of time and energy that might be required in a decision against the reward we can get out of it. And that is a balance. And if we feel that we are expending too much time and energy for a reward, that's not quite right. We feel like we're being ripped off. So if you spend hours going through a form and then you find out you're not eligible for a deal at the bottom, or if you're sat on hold on the phone, and then you can't kind of get what you needed out of that situation, it doesn't feel good, it's frustrating. But also if we feel that the reward is massive and we haven't put too much effort into it, it can feel wrong again, and we might feel that there's a catch that we don't know about. And if we think about this in information terms, often when our users are landing on a web page, they are looking for signs that a page is going to answer a specific question they have in mind. So they might be weighing up, how likely is this page going to answer the question that I need to answer, and how much effort am I going to have to put into doing that. And this relates to a theory called Hicks Law, which is the idea that the more stimuli or choices a user is presented with, the longer a decision is going to take. So that will start to unbalance that equation, and they'll have to be investing more time into figuring out the best solution for their need. So as designers, there's an imperative to present the right kind of range of options, the most useful set of options to a user, and respect people's time. And related to this is this theory, or this book from Steve Krug that some may be familiar with, that our users don't want to have to think. They don't want to have to be putting in unnecessary effort to get through a decision. So as we can see in this quote, as far as humanly possible, when we look at a web page, it should be self-evident, obvious, explanatory. Nothing should unnecessarily be making us stop and think. So we should be leaning on design conventions, what we know about usability, to reduce some of that time and effort that someone's going to have to put in to get to the right decision. So we shouldn't have to devote more than a millisecond to figure out if something's clickable. Using visual hierarchies can help people get a sense of what's in a page. And I can recommend checking out something called User in Your Face that Dan Potenza showed me, where these designers have flipped all design conventions on their head. And you can just feel the pain when you're trying to fill out this form. And related to this idea of don't make me think is don't make me wait. So we know people are considering the amount of time that they need to invest in decisions and the correlation that has with the perceived value of the reward. So there's a real need for speed. And we can all probably relate to situations where you've been sat in a digital experience and then you have to wait and you don't know why, and it immediately feels like it's broken. So if we press on something and we expect something to happen and it doesn't, there's a natural oddity in that will take you out of the intended virtual experience. So that's why we use things like loading animations. We should try and present content, the right content, as soon as it's available, that kind of thing, which could kind of be a talk in itself. So if we know that we're looking for the first best option, we're weighing up the effort against the reward, and we don't want to over-invest time unnecessarily. Why is it that some decisions are harder, and we know that, and we feel that we have to invest a bit more time into them? And I'd like to point to a book called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman, which is a really neat book that divides our thinking into these two systems. And I'll share these with you now through a couple of examples. With this image of this guy, you can look at his facial expressions and probably quite quickly get a sense of what he's feeling, his emotions. Whereas if I was to ask you to figure out the answer to this equation, you can almost feel the friction and you almost know instinctively that's going to be a bit harder. And this is an example of the two different systems. So system one, this is the intuitive, reflexive, habitual thinking that you might do. It's automatic, very quick, it gets you through the day. System two is a bit slower. That's where we're analysing, calculating things, reasoning, it requires patience. And it's system two that we identify ourselves with. But actually, as Daniel Kahneman points out, much of what we're doing in our day-to-day lives relies on system one. For if we were doing everything as if it were for the first time, it would be pretty exhausting. So we build up these habits and learned behaviours, and often when we're using digital experiences, we are using that system one, the habitual side of our thinking. So if you think of the day-to-day things that you might be doing on your phone, whether you're looking at social media, even the tools that you're using at work, you're using learned patterns and behaviours. You expect to find things in certain places. But that means that when we change things, and the interface might be slightly different, there's a system update, it feels a lot harder, and if we're not kind of guided through that change, it can be quite frustrating. So a famous example is from Snapchat, where in 2018 they changed their interface and they received a petition from 1.2 million users asking them to roll back most of those changes, because they hadn't considered the fact that by drastically changing some of the interactions, the core interactions of navigating through the app, they were fundamentally changing the experience in a way that just meant there was a huge mismatch in how people were expecting to get through the experience and what was actually happening. And something else we can take from Daniel Kahneman is that when we're concentrating and we're leaning on system two, overstimulation and distractions make that a lot harder. So a good example is when you might have been sat in a passenger seat and you know the driver is doing a difficult manoeuvre, they need to concentrate. You might instinctively stop yabbering on at them, you might stop talking for a minute, turn down the radio, let them concentrate. And that relates to some of the tasks we get our users to do. When we want people to concentrate and be able to focus on what they're doing, it's natural that we should be removing a lot of that outside distraction. So even here we've taken away core navigation, there's just the back to home link. So with that, we've got some theories and concepts around how we're making decisions. So I'll now talk about how we might use this to design for better decisions. And I'll start with some examples of adding and removing friction, and firstly from some slightly darker patterns in design. For if we know that users are often navigating on autopilot, they have a limited patience, we're looking for the path of least resistance, what happens if we remove decisions entirely? And some obvious examples are from infinite scroll, so on Instagram and on Facebook, through removing the friction of having to load more content and any decision to keep browsing. It's something we just keep on doing, and that can lead to addictive behaviours. We don't have a reason to leave. And similar to Netflix, this may not be that dark, it might be something we actually quite like, the excuse to just sit there and watch the next episode. But it's something that's been done very intentionally, that by removing any friction, any actual action that you have to do to commit to keep watching, it means that it's easier to just let that happen. And subscriptions, I've already introduced you to the bottom right example from Envision, where there's a trend for yearly subscriptions to be presented with a monthly price, which can be a bit misleading. And then the Now TV example, my partner and I, we signed up to a free trial to watch the series on Chernobyl, and then finished watching that, wanted to cancel, and I got a bit of enjoyment watching my partner trying to close down the free trial and just watching him struggle, go to Google, try and figure it out, and eventually he found it in passes and vouchers. But in these examples, both of them, and maybe not exactly by design, but they're making it very easy to sign up and much harder to close this thing down. And this relates to an obvious example that people may remember if they watch Friends, where Chandler tries to quit the gym. And he keeps on going back, and each time the gym management, they add some other obstacle that just means he's not quitting the gym, and he brings Ross for moral support, and then Ross ends up leaving, having signed up to the gym, which is a hilarious episode. But there is a really sad side to this, where According to research done by Citizens Advice, around 40 million people in the UK at the time of the research in 2017 are signed up to one automatic bill for services including gym, TV, online streaming, and around 2 million of those people are struggling to cancel their subscriptions with a cost of £640 a year. So that's not insubstantial, and it means that there's this cost for individual people. But it's not all bad. These are some examples of where friction has been added in or taken away to help the user. So in the left-hand example, when deleting a project on InVision, you have this extra step to check the boxes and then delete the prototype. And then in the top right from Zeppelin, you have to type in the name of the project to delete it. So it's an extra layer of friction, an extra layer of microcopy that's making you stop and think. But it gives you more confidence that the action that you're doing is the right one. And in the bottom right, the default settings in Sketch allow the user to auto-save their work. So it's kind of helping them have confidence in what they're doing. And you might be familiar with this example when stepping out into the road right at the last minute. This is actually a decision that can have a huge consequence. There's this extra step of friction that have you checked the road, and it's massively helpful for tourists who might just forget, they might be in the middle of a conversation. So we can think about that in what we do. What is the right amount of friction to be adding into our user journeys, but also in our work with colleagues? What is the right moment to stop and think? And you can think about this as with the example of how you might advise a friend if they're taking on a decision, particularly if it's got heavy consequences or if there's emotions involved. You may have in the past advised someone to sleep on it, which is a pretty good strategy to pull out the emotion, ideally, out of a decision and let someone have that extra time to reflect. So when could we be doing this in our own lives, whether it's in the way that we format our user journeys, but also when we're advising colleagues? When is a good moment to advise someone to slow down and think? And we know that this is particularly useful in situations where emotions are involved. So you might take the example of credit and credit scores, which for some people is quite a sticky issue. So we can kind of think about when is a good time to slow down our users, give them a moment to reflect, and then from that give them confidence that what they're doing is the right thing for them. And I'll now just have a look at how we might celebrate decisions. Because if we know that people are kind of muddling through decisions, picking the first best option, we want to be able to give people feedback on those decisions after the event, after they've happened. So with these examples, there's an example from Monzo on the left where they have some amazing animation to say you've finished creating your account. From MailChimp, once you've sent a campaign out live, they give you just a bit of a high five to say well done. And even on a more micro level, when you've sent an email, it's a mini interaction that just gives you confidence that this is something that's happened. Here's some really useful next steps, just in case you need them. But we can think about this more broadly, that if, when we make decisions, we know that sometimes people are picking the first best option, and that may not always be perfect. Perhaps we need to have more empathy in decision making and understand that decisions aren't easy, and people may need support in handling decisions after the event. So it's as much about handling the choices that we've made as it is about actually making them in the first place. And there's a quote from Simon Sinek, who has an amazing book on Start With Why, that there's no decision we make that doesn't come with some sort of balance or sacrifice. And I'll just finish with a reflection on getting nosy, and this question of how can we better understand how our users are making decisions. For we're often actually getting to know our users from a bit of a distance. So that might be through data, in a test environment. Even when we're bringing them in for qualitative sessions, we are actually taking them more often out of their home environment and into a lab scenario. And it might be that in that scenario they are thinking slightly differently than they might at home. They might be making decisions slightly differently. So what are there any kind of strategies we can use to try and tap into how people are thinking a bit more closely? And one idea I would suggest is to really pay attention to the words and language that people use as a window into how they're framing problems and decisions. So that could be language that's shared with customer service or user support teams, in comments at the bottom of articles on MSC, in the MSC forum, or in qual sessions. What are the actual words that people are using, and what does that tell us? Because if we think back to the Now TV example, my partner was there struggling around trying to cancel this subscription, and he was probably looking for specific words that would help him out. So he kind of sensed clues about where to look for that. And he just didn't think of passes. That's not something he's ever done before. So had to go back and Google it, and Now TV have clearly not quite married up the right language. Another way to think about this is the objects that people consider important to them, and what we can learn from this about people and how they're kind of building their own understanding of the world and particular things. So I've heard from researchers that there's a technique you can use potentially in a qual session, but it may feel a bit intrusive, so maybe try it out with a friend. You could ask what's in someone's wallet, and by pulling out what's in their wallet, you can understand quite quickly what are the financial products or accounts they've got they're using, what are the mini objects that they're carrying around with them, or perhaps they have everything stored on their phone and they're pretty minimalist. This is an example from a photographer, Jason Travis, who's got these series of images where he's representing people by objects that they consider important, but often daily objects that we're kind of pulling around with us every day. So I'd suggest that maybe we can get a bit more nosy, get curious, look at what other people are carrying around with them on public transport, what they're doing on their phones, and it might feel weird, but actually we are innately nosy as people. You can see clues of that from the shows on TV that get really popular. So it could just be a bit of fun. And thank you. And I'd end with a note of be responsible, because we do have a responsibility, or we have an opportunity to help people through decisions, add and remove the right amount of friction to make decisions really intentional, give people confidence in what they're doing, and then also supporting them once they've actually made a decision, and giving them confidence that they made the right one or whatnot.